All right, kids, buckle up. We got a show to do. Let's do this. All right, good morning, everybody. So this morning we're going to talk about there was a protest yesterday. Kids walked out of a school in protest of, they have a problem with furries in the school. So before we get into that though, I want to take a moment and shout out Miss Cindy D there. So we've picked up quite a few subscribers in the last week or two. And, but I've noticed Miss Cindy D has been watching pretty regularly and become part of the more active morning chat with some of our other regulars. And I just want to say it's fantastic to see somebody else like really engaging and joining in and being a part of this. So here's to you, Cindy. Thanks for joining us this morning and every morning since, and hopefully many mornings here to come. Now, here's the story that I want to talk about today. We've got Utah students. This story comes from TheBlaze. Utah students walk out to protest furries who allegedly scratch and bite them while school officials ignore complaints. Cindy, you are quite welcome. I'm happy to recognize people who are big supporters. Fantastic to have you with us. Hey, and in the comments there, let me know how'd you hear about us. Let me know how you landed on the channel, because that'll help me hopefully get more smart folks in there and more people to talk to. Students from schools in the Nebo School District in Utah walked out of class on Wednesday and claimed to be protesting against furries who growled at them and bit them at school. Okay, that right there. What a long, strange trip it has been. Obergefell is, 10 years ago now? Almost? That was when the Supreme Court stuck their nose in the business, legislating from the bench. And rather than, they could have just said, you know what? There's no constitutional authority for the government to be involved in the business of marriage, and therefore all laws prohibiting gay marriage are stricken down. And that would have been a very cogent, reasonable, and intelligent argument based on the authority of the government being limited by the Constitution, wherein the question of marriage is not addressed. Right? Now, I'm not making an argument right now for or against gay marriage. That is rather beside the point and a different conversation. What I'm talking about right now is the legal question of its litigation of whether or not one is allowed to get married as a homosexual. And there's a reason I'm bringing this up in this story, in this context. instead of saying the Supreme Court, and this was really Justice Roberts' baby, instead of saying the government does not have this authority, which, by the way, would have eradicated marriage licenses, would have eradicated some income tax benefits, legally speaking, but it would have made the whole house of holy matrimony a question for either the states or the churches. Now, in all fairness, as a critique, to some extent, that would have legally delegitimized the entire institution of marriage by taking a federal recognition away from it. But I think there's a good argument to be made that that wouldn't be such a bad thing. In fairness, my wife and I got married when we did, right? I have no doubt that we were gonna get married anyway. We've been together for almost 20 years. It's been a very happy marriage. The fact of the matter, however, is we had to move heaven and earth to get to a place where we could have our wedding because of our, at the time, military statuses. And one of the reasons, and don't get me wrong, I love my wife, I loved her then, I meant to marry her. I did that on purpose. But part of that decision-making process involved how our orders would be affected by our status as a married couple. So we met at the language college at DLI, which is going to come back up in the context of this conversation again. We met at the language college at DLI, and that's in California, Monterey at the Presidio, and we came back to Georgia to get married because fuck California. We actually had a very intense, well, not intense. We were agreed from the get-go, but we had a deep conversation about why we were not going to have our paperwork reflect that we had been married in the communist state of the People's Republic of California. Rather, we came back to good old Georgia and got married in my home, Red Mud. But we had to go out of our way to make that happen, right? It wasn't just a matter of picking out a date on a calendar. We had to schedule it around a lot of other stuff. And that was one of the best decisions I ever made. But a large reason we did it was because we had the conversation. Look, right now we're just two adults enjoying one another's company as far as the law is concerned, and it's quite clearly the case that we have a choice to make. Either we risk what is the statistically probable outcome in a marriage of this sort, which is two students from a college going on to separate locations following that for an extended period. And the likely case is we just, we get married now and we risk a nasty divorce in the future, because that's how a lot of those marriages go, right? You meet at a school, you get married, you go your separate ways for professional or academic requirements, and it's difficult to maintain a long distance marriage, a long distance relationship, and you got to really put your work into it to make it happen. And we said it's either that, or the alternative is we don't get married right now. You go to a duty station, I go to a duty station, and we tell each other we're going to keep in touch, but it doesn't work out. And the likelihood is that, basically our relationship ends when the school ends. So we got married, right? And 3 or 4 days after our wedding, my wife had to get on a plane and go to her new duty station. And a week after that, I had to go to my duty station. And then, 4 or 5 months after that, I got transferred to another follow-on duty station. And we got to spend a total of about 4 days together over one long weekend, a privilege for which I had to argue with a battalion commander who was a native Korean speaker in Korean about why I should get a special exception to the rules to fly to Hawaii to spend some time with my wife before I went on to my follow-on duty station, where I would not see her again until the almost exactly a year after the wedding. So I have some thoughts on what marriage is within the context of law. But the fact that we were married made it possible for me to make a completely separate drug deal to get co-located and stationed and be with my wife. Absent that, my next duty station was going to be somewhere in Korea, and it would have been 2 years before, at least 2 years after that, before she and I could actually cohabitate as a couple at all. That's assuming that we didn't have the marriage in place to use for the legal arguments to get the spousal co-location orders. All of that would also have been undone if the Obergefell decision had been the government doesn't have the right in any capacity to regulate or interfere with marriage. But that would have been the correct and cogent argument. Instead, the Supreme Court chose to leave all existing marriage laws in place, eviscerate all traditional marriage laws, right? All of the marriage laws that said anything other than marriage is between a man and a woman, and then go a step further and compel religious organizations to perform these marriages against their own teachings and beliefs. The same lefties that were screaming for the whole gay rights thing. And think back on where your head was at the time. Most of you didn't care. I know that was my position. My only concern about the question of gay marriage before Obergefell was, why are you wasting my time and taxpayer money on an issue that is absolutely insignificant? It's unimportant. It is psychotic to even discuss it. Why are you burning my money on this non-problem? And back then, you'd have some of the extreme on the anti-gay marriage side make the slippery slope argument. We now know that the slippery slope is not a fallacy. It's not even an argument. It is predictive text. It is simply the way it goes. Immediately after the passage of Obergefell, within just a few days, we started hearing about these tranny bathrooms in high schools, and these demands that, no, boys need to be allowed to go into girls' bathrooms. Whoa. And credit where credit's due, as a tactical maneuver, they got that one right. They caught their political opposition off guard and attacked from a vector that was unexpected by the majority. Tim points out that led to drag shows for kids, which is leading to normalizing pedophilia, and asks, what's next? Well, apparently Furries is next. For those of you who do not know what a furry is, like I said, DLI is going to come back up in this conversation. When I was at DLI, there were a lot of Air Force kids, and I don't know what it was in the water over at the Big Pink Barracks, but there were several Air Force guys and girls who were furries, and they were sneaky about it, right? They would have little attachments on the sides of their uniforms to signal that I didn't know anything about. I had no clue. And then when they were in civilian clothes, without putting on the whole furry costume get up. Like y'all saw in the thumbnail there, right? That's the furries tend to be kind of an anthropomorphized cartoon character type costume, like a Disneyland costume type of animal character. Back then I didn't know what the hell a furry was. I'd never heard of it. And so there were a bunch of the Air Force kids were furries. They'd have these little tags on their uniforms, which is totally out of regs. But then, you know, after hours on the weekend, they're in civilian clothes, and they'd have a little plushy tail, a little fox tail, or a little puppy dog tail that was attached to the back of their pants, or they'd wear a little headband with little cartoon cat ears on it. And I thought that was just like some anime character cosplay thing. And there's a big difference between cosplay and furries. There's a lot of overlap, but there's a big difference. And I'm a big fan of cosplay as an art form. I find it fascinating. And I find the work that cosplayers put into their costumes absolutely impressive, and the results they achieve are just amazing. But a furry is a very different thing. The furries are a sex fetish, right? So you think about your bondage, your BDSM, your black leather, et cetera, maybe you had a particular experience when you were a teenager, and now you get excited at the image of a girl in a schoolgirl uniform or a cheerleader uniform, something like that, right? Those are very technically a fetish, and often it's one that a person acquires involuntarily, and it's related to your earliest, not even sexual encounter, your earliest individual attraction. That's why the cheerleader fetish and the cheerleader costume in adult material is such a popular one, because if you are a red-blooded American boy, it's about a 99% chance that one of the first women you found exceptionally attractive was the most popular girl in high school, who was also a cheerleader or the head of the cheerleader team, something like that, right? That's you've got a positive memory related to that. Similarly with nurses, you were probably in a doctor's office or a hospital sometime in your youth, right around the time you just first started to notice that girls smell pretty, and you had to go to the hospital for a tonsillectomy or an appendectomy, or your broken arm, and a pretty little nurse came in and put a splint and a cast on you. And she wasn't just pretty and dressed in a costume that you would psychologically attach to for the rest of your life, but that experience involved her holding your hand, gently holding your hand, maybe even stroking your face and saying, "Everything's okay, buddy. It's going to be okay. Here, take the painkiller and just talk to me. Tell me a story while I very carefully wrap this cast material around your hand and do everything as gently and carefully as I could." That's where people acquire attractions beyond mere sexual, reproductive, evolutionary motivation. You acquire it from those early engagements. There's a reason there were no furries, and there's a lot of reasons to hate on Disney, and that's not what I'm doing here. That's not what I'm about to get into. But there's a reason that we didn't have problems with furries before our children grew up with Sesame Street, Disney movies, Disneyland, Barney, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's, like I remember a show when I was a kid, Zoobilee Zoo, and I've seen some of the girls that played the characters on that, and those characters, they weren't the costumes, right? They had like a prosthetic beak and heavy makeup and all that. And they were monstrous and horrifying. They had nice figures. Like, I've seen the actresses that played some of those characters. They were good-looking women who were put into monstrous-looking costumes that were somehow supposed to appeal to children, but, you know, kids are different now, I guess. But thankfully, I never acquired that particular proclivity. I'm not a furry. But now, and I know that's a lot of preamble. That's the whole show, right? Preamble explaining what a furry is. Students from schools in the Nebo School District in Utah walked out of class on Wednesday and claimed to be protesting against furries who growled. Oh, shit, I didn't finish the deal. Okay, so the Air Force kids were doing the furry thing. I didn't know what the fuck furry was. And then one day I'm in my barracks room and I'm watching an episode of a television show. I think it was like CSI. And there was a murder where the murderer hid the kill by going to a furry orgy, wearing a furry costume, and committing the murder in the orgy. And it was watching that first episode, I said to myself, wait, what? What? This is not something people do. Bullshit. No, this is not a thing. And, okay, this was a little before Facebook was a big deal, but the internet was in existence, and I got on and started to Googling and learned about furries, and I was shocked. And then the next time I saw one of these Air Force kids with the little tail, I asked him, yo, does that mean what I think it means? And she was, okay. This is back when I was clean shaven and had a good looking military haircut. I was like a sexy Clark Gable, except taller, right? And she was a little too friendly when I asked her about it, but she explained some things to me, and that was like, okay, not for me, sweetheart, but I appreciate your time. That was a little before I met my wife, thank God. So, videos from the protest show dozens of children holding signs and making accusations that school officials were ignoring their complaints about the furry students. So when we say, here's a video from that.
It's not fair. We're not allowed to wear a mask on Halloween, but then they wear masks every day.
So you can't wear a mask on Halloween?
No, we can't wear masks on Halloween.
So they can't wear masks.
Telling me that the furries were attacking you guys in class. Is that right?
Yeah, they bite kids. They bite people. They will bite ankles.
And how do they?
So I wanted to show you that clip, and I'm going to have to go ahead and wrap this up. I want to show you that clip because I want you to understand something here, right? Until now, there's been a concern that exposing our children to sexual deviancy in these schools includes a high risk that sexual deviancy will proliferate through their psyches and their thinking and their engagements and their interests. And the data is pretty clear on that. The whole transgenderism thing, the whole LGBT spectrum has clearly become a severe and concerning social contagion. And that is an issue that requires some real engagement and some real action, not least of which is protecting our children from these psychotic medical malpractitioners who are mutilating their bodies without informed consent. And that informed consent is an important factor there. Please believe, right? Go to a doctor as a 12-year-old girl and tell that doctor, I don't think I ever want to have kids because my little brother and sister annoy me. I'd like to have a hysterectomy, please. Guaranteed the doctor's response will be, no, because you're a child and you cannot possibly understand the permanent and irreversible effects of that decision on your life. But this furry thing that they're talking about, you heard the kids right there. The furries bite them, scratch them. Right? The furries show up to lunch with a dog bowl or cat dish. This is no longer we're no longer talking about the concern of a social contagion. This is a physical hazard. Now, there are many things I would like to see done to improve the public school system. And I understand that not everybody is in a position where they can homeschool their children. So, it is here that I will enjoin. If you are not currently in a position, if you have children and are not currently in a position to take on the responsibility of homeschooling your own children, fix yourself. Figure it out. There is nothing more important for your future and the future of the world, not least this country, than to absolutely starve these schools out. They are not schools. They are not educational facilities. They're little more than prison yards. They're not safe. If you are in a position where you can pull your children out of school, do so immediately. Get it done. Your children are not just being perverted and demented and corrupted. They are in constant physical peril. You know, my mom and dad watched this show, and I saw them comment. They're watching this morning, and the fact is that I went to a public school all the way through until I graduated in the 13th grade. Do with that what you will. But as I've said many times on this show, it is a different creature today. When I was in a public school in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, the teachers had the common decency to be merely inadequate. Right? The people who go into teaching, especially public teaching in K through 12, these are not high quality scholars. These are not brilliant academicians. Now, I had a very few teachers that were quite smart. But by a wide margin, they were not sufficient to engage intelligent children in the rigor of academia. They were not competent to the task. I told the story before about getting thrown out for towering. And the question that I asked that got me in trouble was, when am I ever going to need this? And like I've said, telling that story, you know, that was a teacher that I liked, right? I'm not going to say that Mr. Bomar was the smartest man I ever worked with, but he was sharp enough. He was an American veteran. He was a rock solid fucking good guy. I liked the guy. But we had a little tiff in a classroom. He was teaching imaginary numbers, and I asked the question, when am I ever going to need this? And I saw it flash in his eyes. I saw that I had aggravated him with the question, and I backpedaled. I was like, wait, okay, I'm sorry. I know how that sounded. I didn't mean it like that. I don't mean, you know, I know that probably sounded like, why are you wasting my time? I'm never going to need this. No. I'm genuinely interested. I want to know, I'm curious about what field of academia, what field of mathematics would I pursue where my understanding of this material would be valuable. I'm not mad, right? Like I might want to go on to be a neurosurgeon And this is something that I won't ever need unless I want to go on to be an astrophysicist. I'm just curious, is it astrophysics? Is it string theory? Where am I going to use imaginary numbers? He didn't know. He didn't know the answer to that question. And that's fair. Amusingly, I still don't know the answer to that question because I wasn't curious enough then after I got thrown out of school for asking the question. I wasn't curious enough to go research it on my own. And I'm still not. I don't care. But that happened. I had many teachers that I liked personally. I had an economics teacher. She was a lovely woman. Maybe not the healthiest woman, but anyway, she was wonderful. She was very polite. She was very sweet, and she did a reasonably good job of reading books at us and answering questions that were asked in the book. But whenever I tried to engage her on the actual material, she was not by any stretch a subject matter expert on the economy, right? At the time I was reading things like The Anatomy of Power by John Kenneth Galbraith and the what else? Rifkin's Hydrogen Economy, The Monster from Jekyll Island, a lot of Ayn Rand, and a lot of Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman. And, I'm sitting in a high school, and it was like the teacher had never even heard of these people. And back then, the teachers had the common decency to be merely inadequate. I graduated high school 23 years ago. 24 years ago, a long fucking time ago. Those inadequate teachers are not teaching anymore. They're done. They're gone. They have been replaced by the generation that they failed to educate. And the majority of children, then and as now, are not concerned with their own education. And the entire mechanism of the public school is a part of that problem, because they are essentially trained early on to view the public school as an unwelcome obligation, something that they are forced against their will to do. And they tend to regard academia and their education in that way going forward. And now what we have is a bunch of mush-headed shitheads who didn't go after school, right? I would get out of class when I was in high school, and I would go and work, 4 or 5 hour shift at wherever I was working at the time. I worked at Papa John's a lot during high school. And then I would go and read books and talk to old people at Waffle House all night, like often. I read a shitload of books that were never on any recommended reading list in high school. I was a rare fucking bird in that regard. And the result, a bunch of kids came out of those schools in the late 90s and early 2000s with absolute shit for brains. And those kids today are the older teachers. They're now the ones who have been teaching your kids for 10, 15 years. The children who were poorly educated by the teachers of the 80s and 90s went on to colleges that were democratically, institutionally captured for the purpose of perverting their already inadequate minds to nefarious purpose. And those corrupted imbeciles are now the people who have been teaching your children for the last decade and a half. And that's why you have children 11, 12, 13 years old in a middle school or what is it, a Nebo School District. I guess that's a junior high school, 11, 12, 13. That's junior, maybe high school freshmen, or about to be freshmen. Anyway, there are children showing up to those classes wearing animal costumes and biting the other children. And as these kids make clear in their video, part of the reason they're protesting is because these other kids are biting them and not having consequences for that behavior. They're being treated as if that behavior is an acceptable part of their deranged and perverted identification. Get your kids out of the school. It's the number one thing I want to see you do. So I got to put a pin in it there. I've gone over and I've got to get down the road. Thanks for watching this morning, guys. We love you. Tomorrow is Firearms Friday. I'm going to try to get the three-peat. And we will talk to you in the morning. Love you. Be safe out there. I love you too, Bear, even when you don't comment. Oh, I'm sorry. I do want to show this real quick. Malcolm X. I'm not a big Malcolm X fan, as I'm sure you can imagine, but even a blind squirrel gets a nut every now and then. This statement right here: only a fool would let his enemy teach his children. Now, Malcolm X was an avowed racist, and what he meant when he said enemy was white people. But let's be clear. The enemy, that is, the Chinese Communist Party captured Democrat National Party headed by the Clinton and Biden crime families, is who is teaching your children. Well, cheating, yeah. They're cheating your children. We should start calling them cheaters instead of teachers. Y'all be safe out there.